Welcome to Beyond Bite Wings, the business side of dentistry, brought to you by Edwards and Associates PC. Join us as we discuss how to build your dental practice, optimize your income, and plan for your future. This podcast is distributed with the understanding that Edwards and Associates PC is not rendering legal, accounting, or professional advice. Listeners should consult with their business advisors before acting on any of the information that is shared. At Edwards and Associates PC, our business is the business of dentistry. For help or more information, visit our website at enassociates.com. Welcome to part 2 of my discussion with Dave Rosenberg.
One of the other things that I talk about frequently, I don't know if you came across this, is that communication is the responsibility of the leader. Now, I have people give me pushback on that all the time. They're like, no, people have a responsibility to understand. Yeah, they do. And if as a leader you think, I said it, and it's your job to figure out what I said, then you're setting yourself up for failure, right? You need to ensure your message is received. And you do that by asking open-ended questions. Tell me what you understand your mission is. What is it we're doing here? Why are we doing that? Ask those questions. When you're comfortable that they understand what your intent is, great, because that will give them the ability to adapt when things go wrong. Not if things go wrong, when things go wrong, because no plan survives contact with reality.
And it is true. I mean, think about it, it's not humanly possible. And I'm talking about all kinds of businesses, not just dental practices, for management to anticipate what could go wrong.
Right.
And a lot of times people that are on the floor or in a dental office, the front office, if they know what is it exactly that the role is and what is being expected to be attained from that role, even if there are certain shifts from the procedures, they may know how to go about it or how to tackle that unusual, unexpected thing that may have happened.
Yeah, exactly right. And there's two other pieces to that. One, not just understand your intent, but how does your actions affect downstream people in the workflow?
Right.
Because now when I do something different than is expected, I know what I need to communicate to them, to the people downstream. Hey, here's what's changed. If you don't do that, you're just setting up failure. You're kicking the can down the road, so to speak, in the process, and somebody else is going to potentially fail because you didn't communicate what is different. Right? So that's the mindset thinking we need to think about. How does this affect others, and what's the intent?
I see. So make sure the intent is explained to all levels of people that's on your team, not just a specific level that may usually deal with that situation.
Right. And that, exactly right. So in the military, what happens frequently is when there's a big operation is there's a huge briefing that everybody attends so that everybody has that big picture. Right. Now, you may not have the ability to make certain decisions, but there are other decisions that will affect you, right? Or you make recommendations up as needed, depending on where you are, because you're the guy or the gal in the trenches doing certain things. And they say, hey, listen, you said we want to do it this way, but if we do it that way, here's how it affects us from what we're doing. Here's how we'd like to see it done. And then you get to that middle ground where it actually makes the most sense. The other thing you said that I wanted to do, you can't anticipate everything. However, that doesn't mean you don't anticipate as much as you can. And that's really important because the more you think about what could go wrong and what is my plan B and plan C, in other words, how do I react? That does two things for you. One, you're probably thinking about the most likely, which means, higher probability of something going wrong, and you've already planned for it if it does, but you're also planning, and planning is a skill. And the more you plan, the better you are at planning. So then if something that you didn't anticipate goes wrong, it's usually just an adaptation of something you did think about as opposed to starting from scratch.
That makes you more effective and efficient.
Exactly.
That's good. That's good. What does a good accountability map actually prevent that meetings alone cannot?
Yeah, the accountability map's a phenomenal tool when you think about it. Who owns the process, right? There should only be one person, one name, not a department. Not the front office is responsible for billing. It's Jane, Susie, Bill, whomever. They're responsible for billing. That doesn't mean they're the only ones who do it, but that's the person who has to ensure it gets done. And that avoids finger pointing. That avoids that, oh, I thought somebody else was going to do it. It's like, no, you're the person in charge. What do you mean you thought? Okay, let's have a conversation. Who did you assign to do it? Okay. When did you check on them? All of a sudden, now there's one person to be held accountable. If you don't have that accountability map, what are they accountable for and who is it specifically, then if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. If everybody's accountable, nobody's accountable.
Mm, yeah, makes sense. So let's move on to the second part of the triad, mindset. I think you explicitly mentioned that the mindset is not just about motivation. How should leaders think about mindset if not as inspiration or morale?
Well, first of all, I want to, in my world, and this is by no means a universal definition, I distinguish between motivation and inspiration. Okay. Motivation for me is external. Uh, what's the carrot? So when I was in college, I used to go horseback riding. I grew up in Philadelphia, and outside Philadelphia, a place called Tyler State Park. There was a stable we would rent horses.
Mhm.
I never took formal lessons in riding. I'd rent a horse, I'd get on it, and I'd try and figure out how to make it move. And most of those horses, the only way you get them to move is to give them some heel. And so the moment I'd stop healing them, they didn't want to move and they would stop. So I was motivating them with my heels. One day I rented this horse named Skittles. I'll never forget Skittles because Skittles was full of energy. I didn't have to get him to move. I just had to figure out how to guide him. He would try and brush me off, he'd all sorts of crazy stuff. And he taught me how to ride a horse properly. I'll be honest with you, because I really had something to work with there. So he was inspired to move. And my job was to guide him in the direction I wanted to go. I never had to worry about convincing him to to move. I just had to worry about how to get him where I wanted to go. So inspiration is internal. In general, as a rule of thumb, I rather hire people that are inspired. So the question is, how do I inspire them? Okay. And that starts with the big picture. Why do you exist as a business? What is the greater good, the value you bring to the world? By the way, I guarantee you, and it's probably easier in dentistry, but there isn't a business in the world that doesn't bring value to it because nobody pays you for any reason unless they're getting more value from the service you're providing or product you're
Mhm.
providing than the money they're paying you. Right? Money's just an IOU for value received. So you're bringing value to the world. Talk about it. What is it? Hire people who get excited by that value as opposed to that person who just wants a job. Now, there's nothing wrong with just wanting a job, but they're not going to really light it up if all they care about is the paycheck. They're going to do the minimum to keep getting the paycheck. You want people who are going to do beyond the minimum. So, first, hire people and understand what's your value, but then talk about how every piece works together so everybody understands how their actions affects the total outcome of the job, right? The health of people and how having, in case of dentistry, how do these having healthy mouth and teeth, how does that affect the lifestyle of your client? What makes it better? I had an implant put in a year ago. I went like a year without, well, number 30, since you have dentists there, and I had to learn to chew on my left side. It was terrible. It was just, it was, having
Sure.
good, healthy teeth. Oh my God, it helps so much. But talk about it. Make sure people understand why it's so important, right? Because that implant, by the way, was a replacement because the first dentist I went to who got the original implant, frankly, did a terrible job without going into details. And so, that was somebody who cared about money, not somebody who cared about my health, which is why I stopped going to them. But it took me a while to figure that out. Right? So start with the big picture, and then not just how does it affect the patient, but everyone between you and the patient, from the person booking the appointment, right, to the hygienist, the dental assistant. Everybody should understand how their actions affects the rest of the team, how it affects your vendors, how it affects everything. That's what I talk about mindset. If you ever read the history of anybody who has been awarded a Medal of Valor in the military, Bronze Star, Silver Star, Congressional Medal of Honor, they all, if you hear interviews with them, they all sound alike. And it's simply this: I didn't do anything special. I didn't do anything that anyone else in my unit wouldn't have done if they were standing where I was standing at that time. Because if I didn't do whatever it is I got awarded this for, somebody was going to be hurt and impacted negatively. And so they put their lives at risk, not for a medal, but because it helped somebody else. We will do incredible things to help other people. You want to tap into that mindset, get people to understand that mindset. That's what I mean by mindset.
That's right. So look for people that can be inspired or is already inspired. And motivation, whether it be through compensation or, benefits provided by the business, those are just to remain market competitive. But
Correct. I mean, so, if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of
oh
needs,
yeah.
right? So Maslow's hierarchy of needs is frequently talked about from a how do we get people to higher cognitive cognition. It's really a statement of our need for survival,
Mhm.
and we've always chosen leaders who have enhanced our ability to survive. We'll take it a step further, potentially thrive, but survival comes first, right? So physiological needs, the lowest level, right? And for those of you who are not familiar or listening, Maslow said in short that we have certain needs that need to be met. We don't recognize the higher level needs until our basic level needs are substantially met. So our most basic need is need for food or water, what he called physiological needs, right? We need to eat and drink water to survive. And you'll
Mhm.
take any risk if there's no food or water to get food or water, because the alternative is death anyway. So you have nothing to lose. Of course, once we secure that, then we have a need for safety and security. And the reason for that is simple. If we're not safe and secure, the ability to meet our physiological needs is negatively impacted, right? So we need to be safe in doing that so we can continue to meet our physiological needs. So you fashion weapons, whatever it takes to stay safe and secure.
Mhm.
As humans, we are not apex predators. We are social creatures and pack animals. So individually in the wild, long before civilization, we would not survive on our own. We needed others. And that's the next. So now we're safe, we have some level of safety and security, but to really cement that, we need to find other humans. We need to be part of a group, part of a tribe, because there's safety in numbers. When you're in a part of a group, part of a tribe, there's more safety. You're also better able to meet your physiological needs, right? So it starts to build. If we're going to be part of a group, then we want to stay part of that group. And that's where his esteem needs come in. In other words, not your self esteem, not do I feel good about me? Does the
Mhm.
tribe feel good about me? In other words, am I pulling my weight? Do they hold me in esteem because I'm contributing? And this is where that mindset piece comes in, right? Because if we start thinking about how I affect others, then we have this innate, this is inbred into us. This is part of our anthropological DNA needs over 300,000 years of development of Homo sapien, that we go, if we're not being recognized for contributing to the group, we're going to get kicked out of the group. And all of a sudden, my survival is in question, right? And that's where the mindset. And so, and then, and only then, once all of those are met, do we go, what is it I want to do that I feel like I'm born to do? And if it's in support of all those other needs, I will do it. If it's not, if it doesn't support the team and the tribe and the group, then we're not going to do it, because now our survival is in question. So we hire people who are inspired. We set up those conditions so they can now step into their self actualized self and do what they're meant to do in support of that mission. And that's how you develop a culture where everybody is pulling in the same direction to do the thing and do the job right because they all want to accomplish the same goal.
So we are also talking about visibility, and you mentioned this in that article. Why is it so important? Or rather, let me state the question this way. We understand that making downstream impact visible is important.
Mhm.
Now, what changes when people truly understand who pays the price for shortcut?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've been speaking to, right? Is what changes is your decision to take the shortcut or not, right? So in the article I talked about, walking to work, walking downstream. In other words,
Mhm.
understanding exactly, and in a big manufacturing, you might actually want to go and talk to the people who get the product next, who handle the next thing, and understand what it is they do and how what you're doing affects what they do. Because we don't want to, this is that esteem piece, right? We don't want to let the, excuse me, we don't want to let the tribe down. And so if I understand how it affects you and it has a negative effect and makes your job harder, then all of a sudden I'm now realizing, God, I'm letting the tribe down. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to go and do this step correctly
Mhm.
because if I don't, it's either going to make a lower, inferior product or become a headache for you, right? I am not going to be well thought of. My position in the tribe is going to be at risk, and
Mhm.
that's not even a conscious thought many times. That's just it's the human nature. It's the anthropologically the way we survived for 288,000 years before civilization, and in fact, for the whole 300,000 years that we've been in existence.
Now, let's say you have a strong performer in your tribe, right?
Mhm.
Are there any warning signs that may tell you that this strong performer may undermine that accountability?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question because I see this a lot where you have when you say strong performer, what you're really referring to, because to me the strong performer is somebody who is across the board, but many times there's somebody who's really good in a specific area. I remember working with a plumbing contractor some years ago, and they had a service technician who was technically very good with at their job, and they would go out there and they would fix problems, but they were abrasive as heck. And they didn't follow all the procedures behind the scenes, right? So the client facing side was good, customer facing side was good, everything else was bad. And of course, the owner didn't want to discipline him, afraid of losing him because they thought, well, this is a producer, not recognizing that their behaviors behind the scenes were actually causing other people to not be happy, not be at their best. And so there was a hidden cost to their behaviors affecting everybody else. And at the end of the day, that's a cancer because if he could get away with it, why can't I get away with it? That becomes the mindset, right? We have to hold that standard for everybody. If we have exceptional standards for people because they appear exceptional in one area, then you don't have any standards at all. And so
Mhm.
that's the thing. If they are not, the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. The thing I always wondered about with this guy, and I have no way of knowing, is are they really as good as they say, right? The clients may be happy, but what's happening behind it, in the wall where they're doing their work that you don't know about? Are they taking shortcuts? Are they being quick and shoddy with their soldering, for example? And a leak may show up in 5 years, but you won't
Mhm.
know it. So you have to hold everybody to the same standard, or you don't have any standard at all.
Okay. So now we've reached to the third part of the triad model, leadership behavior and standards. When results fall short, what's the difference between a learning oriented response and what you call theatrics?
Sure. So theatrics is when all you do is blow up, or when I was in the Navy as an officer, one of my jobs was the legal officer. So I'm not a lawyer, didn't even play one on TV. But we were in a command that was too small to have a lawyer attached to it. We were trained in the Uniform Code of Military Justice to the extent that we would administer, not act as lawyers, but to understand when to bring the lawyers in and what's the administrative side of doing all of that. And part of my job, though, was to counsel sailors who were in trouble for some reason, and depending on the severity of what that trouble was. They could have been just what we call dereliction of duty, just not doing their job well, for example. And one of the rules I developed at the time, and is I would never yell at a sailor unless I didn't think they were redeemable, right? Because
Mhm.
at that point, my yelling served no purpose. At any point, yelling served no purpose. At that point, the yelling wasn't to try and redeem the sailor because they were going to go on to um, more stringent forms of being held accountable that were beyond me, was the commanding officer's responsibility. What I wanted was the sailor behind on the other side of the closed door to go, I don't ever want to have to put up with that. Right. I don't hold to that today. Right. I was much younger. That was, 30 some odd years ago, and I've learned a lot. But that was theatrics. All right.
Mhm.
And there was no redeeming value for that at all. I thought there might be for some for others, but the reality is there was no redeeming value to that. As a leader, when we're holding people accountable, and I mentioned this a little while ago, the mindset has got to be my job is to counsel you, to get you to step up and be the person I know you can be. Now, there is a time where you realize you're not going to get there from here. You can't want it more than they do. And if somebody just doesn't want to step up, right? And and this is the beauty about this. If I've done everything in my power to get you to succeed, meaning I've outlined in very specific detail the behaviors, not attitudes, the behaviors that are unacceptable. I've given you the help you need. Here's the resources available to modify and correct those behaviors. Here's a timeline that we agree on that's appropriate for you to improve. And here's the consequences should you fail to improve. And then you don't improve, right? By doing that, I've said, listen, I've set you up for success. I've done everything I can for you. You've decided not to step in and take advantage of this. It's probably time for us to part ways, or whatever that consequence might be, because now you're volunteering for that consequence. Maybe that consequence is moved to another job, right? Well, I can't use you in this position. I'm going to move you into that position. Maybe it's to cut your hours. Whatever those consequences are, if I've clearly outlined them to you, as well as provided you all the support you may need to avoid those consequences, and you're not availing yourself of that, you just volunteered for those consequences, right? And so now all of a sudden it gives me a much clearer way of thinking about what do I do with this individual? Are they redeemable or are they not redeemable? Do they want it as much as I want it for them? Because if the answer is no, that's a different situation. And if the answer is yes, they're really working hard at it. Maybe they're not as capable. Maybe a different job would suit them better, right? I want to know all those things from from an objective perspective.
Mhm.
Candidly, though, that's that whole mindset, that whole thought process, that's back to mechanics, right? That's how we do things.
Mhm.
Model is making sure we walk the talk ourselves. And let me illustrate this with a real life situation. I had a client complain about somebody who was chronically late. And they had the counseling conversations with them. They did all these things that we've just talked about, and they're chronically late. So I decided to dig a little deep. And I said, um, you're the owner of the company. Let me ask you, do you always show up when you say you're going to be there? He says, no, I'm the owner. Sometimes things come up and I don't make it. Okay. Do you
Wow.
ever call people in for impromptu meetings about something that is not super urgent? He goes, well, sure. Things come up and I need to talk to him, and I talk to him when I want to talk to him. I go, yeah, but I'm talking about you don't schedule it. You just say, hey, come to my office. I need to talk to you about something. He goes, oh, yeah, absolutely, all the time. Do you end your meetings on time? No. Do you start meetings on time? No. Okay. So you don't respect other people's time, and you're asking them to respect yours. And his jaw sort of opened up a little bit because he never thought about it that way. He thought, I I don't need to hold myself to the same standards as everybody else. But he got the behaviors he
Was
demonstrated.
exuding. Yeah.
Yeah. And people don't think about it that way. if you don't hold yourself to the standard you're asking your people to, and it doesn't mean you have to, like, it doesn't mean if you're the boss and you ask them to be there 8 to 5, you have to be there 8 to 5. No,
Mhm.
you have a different job. Your job doesn't require that. It does mean if you want them to honor your time, you have to honor their time.
Two-way street.
Yeah, that's what modeling is.
A lot of self-reflection.
Yeah. So we want our people to grow to their highest, best self. At the end of the day, that's the job of leadership. But if we want our people to grow to their highest, best self, we need to be constantly willing to grow ourselves.
Yeah,
We need to lead from the
sure.
front.
hmm If a dentist who owns a dental practice wants to improve team accountability in the next 30 days, what is the first move they should make? And what should they stop doing immediately?
Wow, what a great question. I think the first thing you want to do is reflect about all the behaviors that you personally engage in that if your team engaged in them, would not make you happy. Once you understand and can identify that, you need to own them out loud to your team. And this is the conversation. It sounds something like this. Hey guys, listen, I really want to apologize because I've not been holding you to these standards. And I haven't been holding myself to these standards. And these are important for these reasons. They exist because here's how, if we did these things, it would benefit us. So, my commitment to you from now on is that I'm going to hold myself to these standards, and you have my permission to call me out if I don't, because like everybody else, I'm human, and it's going to take a little while to come onto this. And then I'm going to also hold you to those standards. So, we're going to hold each other to these standards and just start there.
Mm. And is there a way for these leaders to know if accountability is actually improving and not just being talked about more?
Well, yes, because you'll stop seeing rework and mistakes. If you're tracking that, and
The tracking, okay.
yeah, this is one of those things that smaller practices, smaller companies typically
hmm
don't track that, but
hmm
you're aware of it from a qualitative perspective. We are constantly repeating this. How come I have to do this again? Right? You will see that reduce. But again, it's not just the one thing because now you also this is just the beginning. What I just said is just the beginning. But we really want to do, and this is going to take time. You know, uh, my typical engagement is a year minimum. Like I say, it's typical engagement. My starting engagement is a year minimum. It takes that long to really get all the pieces in place. And I've had 8, 10 year engagements because it's an ongoing process where you start with the big processes and creating those, but you start realizing, as I pointed out in the beginning of this podcast, right, that there's other things that you don't think about putting processes to that need to get processes as well. And you start chipping away and you're creating those processes. And then you have to iterate those processes because your first blush at those, they're not going to be perfect. They're going to be flawed. But if any of your listeners there or anybody has ever tried to target shoot with a weapon and learn for the first time, right? It's
hmm
not easy to hit the bullseye. And the first time you shoot a weapon, your shots are all over the place. They call that a grouping, and it's a big grouping, which is not good. What you want is a little grouping where all your bullets are hitting the same area, ideally around the bullseye. But you don't start by trying to hit the bullseye. You just start by trying to get your bullets to hit in the same area consistently. Once you consistently hit the same area, it's a lot easier to move now that towards the bullseye. And so
hmm
that's how you think about it. It's this iterative process where first we get tighter and tighter and tighter, and now we start moving the needle, say, what is our real standard going to be? And that takes
Oh,
time.
that's a great analogy. Yeah, that's a great analogy. Yeah, true. This process start with the bigger picture and then go into the minutia of things. Well, thank you so much for being in our episode today, Dave. You shared a wealth of knowledge with our listeners, and I too have learned quite a bit. It was a pleasure having you. If do you have any last nugget to share with our audience uh, before we part ways?
Yeah, I mean, it's maybe a little bit trite, but be the team member you want your team member to be. It's that simple. Hold
Mhm.
yourself to that standard first. Because if you don't, all the rest is noise.
Wow. Great advice. Well, thank you so much again, Dave. It was a real pleasure.
My pleasure, Ash.
Thanks for listening today. Be sure to subscribe to Beyond by Wings on your favorite podcast platform. For more information, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, or reach out to us on our website. You can also shoot us an email at info@eandassociates.com.